Yo, what's up everybody? This is Chris from Hair Loss from Steroids, and I wanted to talk a little bit about, so you guys can understand, that there's actually two types of hair loss. And if you can understand this, you can possibly put better in perspective the type that you're experiencing, if you are experiencing, and if you're using steroids, kind of put in perspective of what's really going on in the entire process here. So, the first type of hair loss, and this is mostly what we discuss, is called androgenic alopecia, and that's hair loss from DHT. And this involves a miniaturization of the hair follicles, and it largely follows a very distinct pattern, which we call male pattern baldness, which is on the crown and then in a horseshoe pattern on the hairline. And basically what happens is DHT attacks the hair follicles, basically almost suffocating them, so the hairs grow less thick, there's less nutrients that can get to them, and they get smaller and smaller over time until they're dead. So that's androgenic alopecia, hair loss from DHT, and that's mainly the kind that we are trying to prevent. And that is permanent hair loss, that is progressive hair loss. So, the other type that I like you guys to be familiar with, in a very unscientific term, I just call that shedding, okay? And that is different from androgenic alopecia. It's just shedding. It's not male pattern baldness. It is not progressive. It is not necessarily DHT related. So, everyone has a certain amount of hairs on their head that are prone to male pattern baldness. Some guys have a lot, some guys have very few, and like I said, it usually starts in a distinct pattern, usually on the hairline for guys, but also on the crown of the head as well if you're prone to it up there. Now shedding is different. I got my notes here and I'm reading off of them. Shedding is certainly different. Shedding is something you're very familiar with in the zones that are not prone to male pattern baldness, like on the sides and in the back that are absolutely not prone to male pattern baldness. You will still lose hair there. It's not completely lost as it grows back. So shedding is a result of hairs entering the telogen phase, and that is the resting phase. A certain amount of your hairs on your head at all time are in the anagen phase, and that means they're growing. And then there's a phase where they shed, and then there's the telogen phase. I'm only talking about the two stages here. The one in the middle is really less significant. The telogen phase is where hairs are in the resting phase, and this occurs for about a period of anywhere from 1 to about 4 months. So not every hair follicle on your head is necessarily growing or out. Okay, some of them are resting. You don't see them, but they later start growing again. So when hairs basically go from the anagen to the telogen phase, they shed. And that's natural. That is not a big deal. That's not male pattern baldness. That is simply hairs that are shedding that are going to come back, and it happens all over your head. Not just in the zones not prone to it, all over your head. Completely natural, nothing to really worry about. However, there are circumstances in which your shedding will elevate. The most obvious that is pretty familiar to a lot of guys is just something called seasonal shedding. You'll probably notice a period of 2 consecutive months. For me, it seems like June and July, and then December and January, which would make sense. They're roughly 6 months apart, where more hairs are in the telogen phase, or going from the anagen phase to the telogen phase. So I see elevated shedding. Now, I know from doing this, or from observing this for many years, that those hairs are not lost. So when I do shower and I find more hairs in my hand and stuff like that, shedding, I don't really panic, especially if I can like pull them out. You know, I just got some right there from the zones that are not prone to it. It's gonna come back. It's not a big deal. But That's one thing that everyone's pretty familiar with, these seasonal shedding phases. If not, think back to what I just said. Maybe you have them, maybe they're not as distinct. Another thing that can elevate shedding is hormonal fluctuations, and the most extreme example I can bring up of this is actually from women. When they enter menopause, there are very much wild hormone fluctuations. When they have a child, pregnancy, post-pregnancy, wild hormone fluctuations, and often women see hair loss during that period, very pronounced hair loss actually, and it can be very distressing, but likely all that hair is coming back. It doesn't lose any girth. It has the same exact thickness as it was. Hormones just need to stabilize in order to provide an environment to regrow the hair. Another hormonal example is thyroid. Now, if you have an underactive thyroid, your body as a defense mechanism basically takes energy away from growing hair and maintaining hair to supplement the thyroid that your body is not producing, the energy that your body needs to just carry on its essential kind of life, its essential requirements and stuff like that. So if you have an underactive thyroid, certainly you can experience hair loss. It's par for the course with that. If you have an overactive thyroid, hyperthyroidism, the same thing can happen. It's a little different. The body's not exactly dictating energy away from the hair follicles. It's actually the body's is very rapidly moving. So hairs that would normally be in the anagen phase for a period of maybe 6 to 8 months quickly enter the telogen phase, quickly come back to the anagen phase. Everything's on overdrive. So shedding is not something to worry about. Another example here is this. A lot of guys, when they first try out minoxidil, their hairs start shedding. That causes them to panic, and it shouldn't be reason for panic. I understand why it is, but it shouldn't be reason for panic. It's actually evidence that minoxidil is working. Minoxidil tries to shift all your hairs into the anagen phase. In doing so, the pre-existing hair follicles that have hairs in the anagen phase sometimes shift to the telogen phase very quickly, shed, but they're back on your head in a matter of months. So those are examples of shedding. Now, obviously and another extreme example, it's a little less related. Don't knock me if I don't have the science on this. Chemotherapy. In doing so, if you've ever had chemotherapy or seen someone that is, their hair sheds, they are bald, but their hair can return just the same. In all instances of shedding, the hair follicle is not killed. It is not attacked by DHT. The hair simply sheds, going from the anagen phase to the telogen phase, sometimes, in very large quantities, but it can all be recovered. Now, different from androgenic alopecia, where DHT attacks the hair follicle. So, if you guys out there are juicing, you can experience both of these types of hair loss at a very elevated rate. Obviously, if you're messing with DHT compounds, trenbolone, certainly testosterone is one, and maybe dianabol, anadrol, those very androgenic compounds, that is giving your system a big blast of DHT. That DHT will attack the hairs prone to it and shrink them. But what we'll also do is, anytime you put another compound in your body, a hormonal compound, a steroidal, it will make your hormones fluctuate very rapidly. Say you inject a gram of testosterone, your testosterone will go up, your estrogen will go up, your progesterone will go up. Now, why the DHT from the testosterone can attack your hair follicles, it's also very likely just from the hormone fluctuations that you get the second type of hair loss, which is shedding. Again, if you do steroids and you're prone to male pattern baldness, you're going to get both of these, okay? Now, people want to know, will my hair regrow? I just juiced, I got some hair loss, will it regrow? The answer to that is yes, but I'm going to split it up in two different categories. The hairs that were knocked out from androgenic alopecia will regrow. They will likely be a bit thinner. The hairs that have shed will regrow to their full capacity. So if you're juicing, there's two types of hair loss you can experience. One is more permanent than the other, but let me just put it this way. If you're losing hair in the shower and you're doing steroids, not all of that hair is lost from androgenic alopecia. Simply the hormone fluctuations, on cycle and off cycle, post cycle, if you're doing it right, you know, your hormones are very much fluctuating then too. When it returns to normal, your normal growth cycle of hair will, you know, preside at that point. So a question then to be asked is, you know, well, how do I tell the difference? What am I experiencing? Am I experiencing androgenic alopecia, or am I experiencing shedding? And that's the part that's very, very hard to figure out. I wish I could give you some sort of test, some sort of scientific, you know, certainties here. I can't. In the shedding phase, this is what and I almost just thought of this right now. If, like, you saw me pulling on the hair in the back of my head, okay, there's a little that came out from the back of my head where there's no male pattern baldness, there's no hairs prone to DHT back there. I just pulled it out, okay, the little pull test, if you will. The fact that it came out, you know, largely tells me that probably a good amount of my hairs are in, you know, getting ready to fall into the telogen phase to shed. Now, that's a very unscientific way to distinguish the two, but, you know, if you can pull out your hairs very easily, especially from the non-male pattern baldness zones, you know, a lot of your hairs may likely be in, you know, ready to enter the telogen phase. So that would suggest that your shedding phases are up. I know mine are up right now, but it's very, very hard to tell the difference. You can use maybe that one little test, but, you know, if you are juicing prone to hair loss, you're going to experience two types of hair loss. One will be more permanent than the other. They both will regrow. The shedding will come back to its full capacity. The hairs knocked out from androgenic alopecia will likely come back a bit thinner and likely continue on in that state. The best you can do is to keep your DHT levels low using finasteride if you don't use that, or if you do use that. Topically inhibiting with azelaic acid is one of my suggestions in combination with minoxidil. So I hope this made sense to you a little bit. There's two types of hair loss. One is permanent, one is not. The shedding is completely natural, and it's very hard to tell whether you're shedding or you're experiencing androgenic alopecia. But in my eyes, it's good news because a lot of people do panic when they get elevated hair loss. Now, simply losing hair is not evidence of permanent hair loss. If that were the case, I would probably be bald like 27 times over. It regrows as long as it's shedding. And if it's androgenic alopecia, it will regrow too, but probably not to its fullest extent. Take care.